Hello, welcome to the Statistics Solutions webinar on the literature review. Okay, as we go along, we do have a support person on, and you can type in your questions as we go along. Some questions our support person will be able to answer during the presentations, and some that are content related, I will wait till the end and answer those. Okay, so the literature review. Here are the things we're going to cover. And I just want to start by saying that fundamental advice is to follow your school's template. We're going to go over the kind of basic and fundamental sections that are typical to the literature review. But schools sometimes have their own kind of particular things that they want or they don't want. So that's always the best place to go and to consult if you have questions. Some schools don't have guidelines, which makes it a little more difficult. But this will serve as a basic guide. And again, the typical features of the literature review, which is what we're going to cover today, which involves the introduction, the literature search strategy, the theoretical framework, which may or may not appear in the chapter 2 or the literature review. Some schools want it in there, some schools don't. We'll cover that in a minute. The actual review of the literature, which is really the meat of the chapter, and a summary. And just to kind of give you some clarity on chapter 2, or a heads up, the chapter 2 is just a lot of work. There's no kind of magic bullet. There's no kind of, I'll give you strategies and tips, but it's reviewing. It's a comprehensive review of the literature on your topic. So it's going to take a good bit of research and a good bit of writing, and they're typically pretty long. So that's just kind of to kind of go into it clear-eyed about it. Okay. All right, the introduction. Like any introduction for any chapter, you want to orient your reader. So it's always a good idea to restate the purpose of your study. Why your study is important to conduct. Remind the reader of that, or the need for your study. And you could preview the contents of the chapter if you want, the sections. Next, typically, is the literature search strategy, and this is just a description of how you searched for the material that you're reviewing in the lit review. And the idea is you want to convey to your readers a sense of comprehensiveness, that your search was comprehensive, right? That it wasn't narrow, that it was kind of broad and deep. So you do that, by describing it, by talking about the databases that you searched. Here's a list of the databases I searched. Here's a list of the search tools I used. If you needed to search any specialized journals, you would include that. It's always a good idea also to include the search terms that you use, and these will be, obviously, your variables, your major concepts, any theories that you used, and any kind of combinations that worked that help you to kind of zero in on relevant information. You also want to include any kind of way you qualified your search. That would include maybe if you only wanted to obtain full text articles, English only articles. But the two things that are really important to kind of highlight as far as qualifiers is date of publication, and that the things that you searched were peer-reviewed academic articles. That's real important because the bulk, if not everything, in chapter 2 should come from peer-reviewed sources. So, no websites, no kind of, dictionaries, anything general like that. I mean, websites can be used sparingly if you need some statistics or something, but they're not included as material that you're reviewing. Books you also use very sparingly. So the currency really is the article, the peer-reviewed article and peer-reviewed studies. The date of publication is typically important. Again, check your school's guidelines. Some schools want the material to be recent within 5 years of when you're going to publish or finish your dissertation. Some schools it's 5 to 7 years. Some schools it's 10 years. Some schools don't have no stipulations. They don't, the date doesn't seem to matter. But the general rule of thumb is that because the lit review is a kind of snapshot of current research in your area, the more recent, the better. Because something that happened 20 years ago may not be relevant anymore. A study that was conducted, 12, 15 years, that information may be out of date. So it's always best to stay as current as possible as a general rule of thumb. But again, get a hold of your school's guidelines and follow those. And also, I recommend just getting a sample approved dissertation or two from your school, that's similar. Because you can get guidelines and consult guidelines and go to webinars about these things. But it's always nice to have somebody's example at hand when you're sitting down to write these sections. Okay, theoretical framework in the lit review. Again, this is a school thing. Some schools want the theoretical framework in chapter 2, some schools don't. Some schools require the theoretical framework in chapter 1, kind of a quick description of it, and then want a more elaborate treatment of the theoretical framework in chapter 2. That's fairly typical. So if the your school does want the theoretical framework in chapter 2, like I said, it's usually an extended version that appears in chapter 1. But what you want to do is the fundamentals, who developed the theory. Obviously, you anchor that was a citation and a year. What did they develop the theory for? To explain what? Define the theory, along with any associated components that the theory has. Discuss what the researchers have used the theory for, and try to connect the theory to your study. In other words, how are you using the theory to explain what you're looking at in your study? And sometimes schools want you to include a couple articles that you have used the theory recently, just to show that the researchers are using the theory and what they're using it for. The next section is really the heart of the lit review, because it is where you actually review the literature on your topic. And this could have several subsections, as many subsections as you really need. And the way to kind of go about this, because you're going to have a lot of material, you're going to have to break it into into sections based on your variables and your major concepts, right? So if you're studying transformational leadership and emotional intelligence, you would have sections on transformational leadership, right, where you kind of define it. And then you begin to talk about recent work on transformational leadership, recent studies, what these studies have shown, how they connect to what you're doing, or how they set up to what you're doing. Within this section on transformational leadership, you might have subsections based on the kind of themes or the kind of ideas that are coming out of the current or the literature. Then you would have a section on emotional intelligence. And again, define it. Again, you probably have subsections within that based on certain issues that are kind of being raised in the literature, which you won't know about until you kind of get into the literature and start digging into it. So the structure should follow, what you're studying, your major concepts, your variables. Okay, use headers to organize material into sections based on factors, variables, and major concepts, right? Organize material in sections that typically by having a section introduction and then reviewing the research, right? We talked about that. Reviewing research consists of synthesis and analysis. So part of what you want to do is kind of summarize the study or the article. What was the study on? What kind of study was it? Who are the participants? Maybe the setting. What was the purpose of the study? And it's real important to include the findings of the study, right? What did they find? But as you do that, you want to see where the findings from one study disagree with or support the findings of another study. So you kind of want to put them in dialogue a little bit with one another. So that's part of what the synthesis is. It's not just summary, it's kind of summary synthesis. As you go along, you're kind of, weaving the studies and the findings together. Okay, here we go, synthesis. The combination, the general definition of synthesis is the combination of parts to form a whole. Combine information from studies to make your points. Synthesize at the paragraph level and use standard paragraph organization strategy. Kind of the challenge is you have a lot of information from these studies. You may have information that may be a little difficult because it's it's things you're getting used to. It's written at a high level, and you may be lost. But just remember when you're writing, your fundamental conceptual unit is the paragraph. And so even though it's maybe different information, just think of your paragraphs need to cohere, just like we learned in high school and in middle school. Have a topic sentence, have evidence, and discussion of the topic within the body of the paragraph, right? You kind of illuminate on the topic that you set up in the topic sentence. And this again can include features from the studies, what they're about, what they found, noting where findings differ from one another. Then you have a summary sentence that either summarizes or transitions to the next paragraph. And here's an example of a typical paragraph, right? Synthesizing information, where we have the yellow as the topic sentence, the evidence or discussion sentences that elaborate on the topic, and the summary or transition statement. And this is just an example. Again, you want to get some of the information from the studies that include things like the findings and the purpose. Okay, and just to make everybody aware, just as we're going through, I remembered, you will all get a version of the presentation today, which will include the actual slides and the audio component. Okay, so analysis 2 is you want to do some analysis as you're writing your lit review too. So you're commenting kind of on the on the studies as well. So that means, how well the studies seem to be doing what they're doing. They may have shortcomings or gaps. So-and-so, conducted this study that was really on target in some ways, but it didn't cover certain important things. You can note those kind of shortcomings or those gaps. You also want to note trends in the research. You know, what researchers tend to be focusing on, sometimes, and gaps, because sometimes that can help set up the need for your study. You know, researchers really focused on, you know, qualitative research on this topic, but they haven't really focused on quantitative. You know, so the idea of the research too is to really make an argument based on the research. Not only what's in the, you know, here's what's in the research, but here's not what's in the research, and hence making a larger argument for the need for your study. Um, and so they, you know, as a large argument that way, the chapter kind of reiterates, you know, your research problem at the end, and we can get to that when we get to the summary and the need for your study. And it culminates in, like I said, in a larger argument for conducting your study. Here's what the research is focused on, but yet we still need research in this area, which is what your study is designed to do. Okay, and then the summary. Recap major points from the chapter, just like any summary. Again, remind the readers of the research problem based on what is in and what is not in the literature. That's kind of what I was just talking about. Here's all the kind of things the research has covered. You're giving the reader, you know, a review, an analysis of the research that's out there, all the while kind of reminding the reader that there are still problems, there are still gaps in the research, and that's what your research is designed to fill. Reiterate the need for your study. Okay, whoops. I don't know what happened there. Okay. And here is our phone numbers, our contact information. And again, everybody will be getting a version of the slides and the entire presentation, including the audio component. Does anyone have questions? They can type in the chat box or the questions box. Okay, I have a question here. Let me read it so everyone can benefit from this. During the research process, do you have recommendations for conducting a comprehensive search most efficiently? Yeah, there's no, you know, as far as recommendations, you know, just start with your, you know, your major concepts, your variables. If you know, if you have parameters as far as, you know, dates, you know, like you have to keep your research recent, you know, make sure you click on that filter where it says, you know, only go back to, you know, 2015 or 2016. That way it will kind of cut out all the older stuff and just give you the more recent stuff. So any way you can kind of tailor and hone in on things and get rid of the stuff that's really not important to you is always good. And what I do recommend too is if you have, I mean, all your school libraries should have reference librarians support. So if you have any questions, usually you can communicate directly online in real time with a librarian, or you could even call if you wanted to. So if you're having any kind of trouble or you need tips, you know, searching that way, definitely take advantage of that resource. Okay, can you go back to the slide that talked about the main elements in the literature review? Yes. this slide, the contents. Okay, for the theoretical orientation, is that regarding the type of study, example, phenomenological? No, your phenomenological would be the design. So like a correlational study, if you're doing a quantitative study, if it's correlational, if it's qualitative, if it's phenomenological, that's the design. The theoretical orientation is usually the theory that kind of undergirds everything. So if you're, you're looking at transformational leadership and emotional intelligence, that's just off the top of my head. You would need a theory of leadership to undergird transformational leadership. You would need, to talk about emotional intelligence, the theory underlying it as well. So that's what the theories are. It's not the design of your study. I found it easy to find gap material when doing a qualitative design. I am now doing a quantitative and find the gap search more difficult. Yeah, I can see that because a quantitative is usually more targeted. So the gap usually has to be kind of more specified, because with the qualitative design, you usually have some room for exploration. Like you can explore a topic kind of in depth, which gives you a little more freedom. So yeah, it can be a little more difficult finding a gap with a quantitative study, but it's something you just, you have to see what's out there and what needs to be done. Also look at the specific recommendations. You probably know, but at the end of articles, usually the researchers give recommendations for further study. I mean, if you can get look at that, and those help too, to give you a targeted kind of direction, even for quantitative studies for future research. Is there a page limit for the literature review? Great question. And I wish I had a black and white answer for you, but I don't. And there's a couple reasons for that. First of all, schools, some schools have requirements that you obviously should adhere to, and some schools don't. I've seen lit reviews be 10 pages. I've seen lit reviews be 80 pages. Again, follow what your school says, but it seems like a good kind of middle ground number is about 30 pages, 20 to 30. Seems typical. And the idea, again, is to have a comprehensive kind of review of the research, of the recent research. I mean, that's the spirit of it. So if you don't have a limit, and of course this could be a chair preference too. Always, consult your chair to see if they have a preference, if your school doesn't. The slide appeared before review of the literature. Okay. You're talking about the theoretical framework. Does social statistics solutions work with those? The slide after this slide. Yeah, I don't know if Isaides answered this question for you, but yes, we work with EdDs. Absolutely. A lot of people we work with are from education. Yep. Okay, good. I see the answer there. Yep. After acquiring all your articles for review, any suggestions on how to organize these materials in a way to make conceptualization easier prior to writing? Yeah, they're all different. It's going to be based on what you're studying at. So it's going to be based on your major concepts, your variables, your factors that you're looking at. you should have sections for those. And then within those sections, your subsections are going to be based on what's actually in the literature. You know, so if it seems like a lot of research is focusing on this one thing, or a couple of things, let's say, you would have subheaders for those foci. So yeah. So they're all kind of different. And again, if you get an example from your school of an approved dissertation, look at the lit review to see how people have handled them. And again, they're going to be unique because all the studies are unique, but they should largely focus on your factors that you're studying and your variables. I wanted to know if recommendations for access to databases if you are not currently enrolled in school. Yeah, that's tough. And I'm not sure. I mean, there's Google Scholar is out there, of course. Everyone knows about Google Scholar. Of course, the downside with that is you never know what's, some things are, open access, some things aren't. Yeah, but as far as academic databases, and if you're not enrolled in school, I know you can buy access from the publishers of these databases themselves, but I think it's pretty expensive. So it's best to be enrolled in school so you have access to their academic library. Is there always a theoretical framework? Okay, so in my study, I'm looking to find out what are the lived experiences of self-care practices among community mental health providers. I'm not sure I have a theoretical framework in here aside from looking at and defining self-care and community mental health settings. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what a theoretical framework is. So if you're looking at, let's see, lived experience of self-care practices among community mental health providers, right? If there's any kind of like approaches or theories of community or self-care practices, like if there's a theory of that or a model of that, and if you're doing a qualitative study, which it sounds like you're doing, so what your framework helps you do is it not only helps you explain like when you get your results, but it's going to help guide your interview questions. So you would want a self-care model or kind of concept of self-care that aligns with kind of what you're trying to find out in your study. And whether you actually need something called a theoretical or conceptual framework or not, that's up to your school. But it's probably best to have some kind of framework that is going to guide your interview questions, kind of guide your thrust and guide your explaining the results. And again, it doesn't have to be a theory per se. It could be a model of self-care, and they're out there. And a model just being, effective self-care involves these components. And again, it should be things that kind of align with the information that you're seeking to get. Okay, this slide. Okay, the review of the literature side. Okay, awesome. All right. How should you go about a review of literature on a topic that is not that not a lot is known about? For example, if you're studying the effect of COVID-19 has had on something. That's a good question, and that comes up a lot in for qualitative research too. When you're exploring something that there's little research on, you just have to frame it. Go for the research that is close to what you're doing as possible. So, you threw out the example of COVID-19. Obviously, we don't have a lot of information on COVID-19 yet, but we do have a lot of information on pandemics. So it probably would be best to see, what kind of pandemic literature and studies relate as closely to your study as possible. So you see what I mean? It's like, if there's nothing out there specifically exactly on that because it's under researched, you have to get as close as you can and try to connect it to your study. Okay, great. About the database access question, somebody else responded. Some universities offer a community library membership worth looking into. Definitely. Yeah. Yeah, I think you can get, you can buy a membership at an academic library. I don't know how much they are. I think if you're right. Good. Thank you for reminding us. Great. Yeah. And thank you for that response. That reminded me and helps everybody else. Okay. Did I cover everybody's questions? Okay, great. All right, I'm going to let everybody go if there's no more questions. I don't see any, unless I'm missing something. I got a new one here. Okay. Great. All right. Thank you. All right. Thank you, everybody, for the kind words. You're welcome. We run these on different topics, different parts of the study every week. So check in, see what we're offering. And, check in with a consult to see if there's something that we might be able to help you with that you can sign on for, or just to see what we offer. Thank you for attending. Have a great day.